Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about this new Israeli war on Gaza. And the numbers are hard to keep track of. They increase exponentially every day. What we have now is 200 to 300 Israeli strikes, airstrikes a day, 1,100 so far in total. Over 100 killed, 400 wounded, mostly civilians, including 20 children. And 0 Israelis killed so far, and I believe there's been 3 wounded Israelis. 2,000 damaged buildings and homes, 100 homes destroyed. And now we also have 40,000 Israeli troops called up for a ground invasion that seems almost inevitable. And 3 rockets fired from Lebanon. And that was a random event. Of course, Israeli forces returned fire, but nothing else has happened with that thus far. And for the most part, this looks like a rerun, as it were, of previous Israeli incursions into Gaza. The last one in 2012, we had 1,400 Palestinians killed and 15 Israelis killed, so always disproportionate. And it's different in this way, in this one way, though. There's a sense of finality in this recent Israeli offensive in Gaza. It really feels like they want to once and for all take care of Hamas. And let's remember that this offensive is also taking place in what amounts to the world's largest open-air prison, with a very densely populated area. In fact, it's one of the most densely populated places on Earth. 2 million people crammed into that area. And most people are familiar with the sequence of events, but now there's a few more interesting pieces of information that have come out about a lot of these events. So let's run through them with the holes filled with new information we have. So first of all, let's go back a little bit further, because this has a lot to do with the unity government created by the Palestinians, with Hamas and Fatah representing Gaza and the West Bank, both operating as a single entity and creating a unity government. And this is not what Israel wants. And it's kind of interesting with Israel because, of course, initially they didn't want to negotiate. They claimed they didn't have a negotiating partner because there was 2 separate Palestines, and now there's one unity government, and they say they can't negotiate with them together. And then, of course, before the terms were you have to stop terrorism, and then after they stopped terrorism, they had to change their leadership, and that was Arafat at the time. And now, of course, they're demanding that the Palestinians accept Israel as a Jewish state, which, of course, Palestinians as Muslims have a problem with their former country basically being called exclusively a Jewish state. And so then, actually previous to the kidnapping of these 3 Israeli students back in May, there was little attention paid to 2 Palestinian boys that were murdered, and it was on video, murdered by Israeli troops. And there wasn't quite the media attention that we have now, or the kind of repercussions. So then follow that on June 12th with the 3 Israeli students being kidnapped. And let's remember that every day and every week in Gaza, and probably the West Bank as well, there are Palestinians who are kidnapped by Israeli security forces, and people killed on a regular basis. So it's relative, but of course when it's 3 Israeli students, then it becomes an international crisis. And I don't want to diminish the importance of 3 students and what was done to them, but like I've expressed in other forums, it's a criminal act, and there's no real idea of who exactly is responsible. And as it turns out, Israel did know who was responsible. They know who the individuals were, and that they are associated with a rogue Hamas outfit, and that legitimately Hamas may have had no knowledge whatsoever of this. But that's, that's all relative, because these events have served to fulfill this new part of the agenda. And part of that agenda was the fact that we also now know that Netanyahu and Israel knew that the 3 boys were dead right off the bat, and they knew who did it, and yet they still did their roundup. 560 Palestinians arrested, 1,500 houses raided, and 6 killed. And then, of course, after that, we have the revenge killing of the young Palestinian boy, and all kinds of inflammatory rhetoric coming from the Israeli government, which has succeeded in whipping the devout in Israel into a racist frenzy. And we have, of course, now the rockets and the retaliations and the set of retaliations and revenge and this tit for tat that we've seen over the years all too often. And we know how it plays out, because neither one will back down for quite some time. And so let's look at it a little more closely. Firstly, the strategy. Strategy is ultimately, this is revenge. This is punishment for the unity government. This is punishment for daring to resist. And it's pure and simple. And also, it's another excellent excuse for Israel to go into Gaza and go after Hamas yet again. Always looking for an opportunity to do that legitimately. And the bottom line is, Israel does not want peace. As long as there's no peace, they can continue to confiscate land. That's at the very heart of this issue. Let me say that again. As long as there is no peace, they can continue to confiscate land. So Israel does not want peace. So these escalations only prove what Israel tries to deliver as the message of these events here, and then they continue to build settlements. And that gets to the very root. So we have the strategy. Now, the root of these problems, I know there's a lot of people that don't want to look at it in this big picture, but it's all about the settlements. It's all about, first of all, the Israeli claim to right to existence. And the very fact that they have that as a major issue, this continued concern with right of existence, reveals to me a certain amount of guilt about how that existence came about. And they don't want those facts challenged. But more importantly, the talk of 2 states, of course, has become more and more ridiculous. And the real strategy of Israel to continue stringing along the hopes of peace talks that will never happen, or peace agreements that will never happen, as settlements continue, so that the settlements become a form of continued occupation of confiscated lands, and also doing more land grabs. And also, I know what a lot of people are thinking, well, what about the terrorism? What about Hamas? What about these rockets? And I know it's a little bit of a moral stretch, but I tend to look at things historically. So, like I say, first of all, you have to separate criminal acts from acts of war. So, like, for example, the kidnapping of these 3 Israeli students is a criminal act and should be treated as such, but it ends up being an act of war. And then we have the outbreaks of these violence. And the other thing is that these rockets are primitive at best, as we've seen. And what other means does the Palestinians have of letting Israel know they're there? It's their only way of striking back. And I know a lot of people don't like the idea of Palestine striking back, but as long as there's an occupation, there will be a resistance. It's a fairly simple fact. And it's very tenuous for the Israelis to treat the Palestinians with any humanity, because it would be too close to acknowledging the Palestinian tragedy. And they also can't afford to show any mercy, because that also shows some acknowledgement of the Palestinian tragedy. And it's also why we get this incessant demonization of the Palestinians, because Israel has to keep demonizing them enough until they have control of the entire country, and ostensibly they do. And the settlements are for occupation. Occupation means no peace. The settlements go on. Look at over last several months and last several years. Every time there was some sort of transgression by any Palestinians, they would immediately threaten with more settlements. And they've continued to announce more and more settlements all the time. And remember Palestinians' bids with the UN and trying to jockey for statehood. All the announcements of new settlements by Netanyahu in Israel. So this is how it goes, and there's going to continue to be more and more settlements, and there will never be peace. And all the talk of two states is something that will never happen. And something else we're also seeing here, of course, is the usual U.S. and Western media coverage, all pro-Israel, all diminishing what is happening to the Palestinians and shifting the blame. And the entire story of an American Jewish boy who was beaten by the Israeli police, captured on video, is now a subject that is now swept under the carpet in the context of this war. And interestingly enough, the three Jewish boys who killed and burned alive that young Palestinian boy, they're already released from prison on house arrest, and one of them already has an alibi. So they will be set free in no time, and virtually are free right now. And it's also kind of interesting that, as it turns out, the average Israeli will probably never even meet a Palestinian. The separation between the cultures is so complete now. Here's a great quote about that by Gideon Levy in Haaretz News out of Israel, and it goes to say, quote, "Disconnected from reality, the majority of Israelis pursue their regular way of life. In their mind's eye, the world is always against them, and the areas of occupation on their doorstep are beyond their realm of interest. Anyone who dares criticize the occupation policy is branded an anti-Semite. Every act of resistance is perceived as an existential threat. All international opposition to the occupation is read as delegitimizing of Israel and as a provocation to the country's very existence. The world's 7 billion people, most of whom are against the occupation, are wrong, and 6 million Israeli Jews, most of whom do support the occupation, are right. That's the reality in the eyes of the average Israeli," unquote, from Mr. Gideon Levy. And then now we have Netanyahu coming out and revealing himself to be the cult of personality, the strongman that we know him to be. He's come out and said, quote, "I will end it when our goals are realized, and the overriding goal is to restore the peace and quiet," unquote. But of course the goal actually is to smash Hamas as viciously as they can with this opportunity. And it's a good time too, because there's so much chaos going on in the Middle East. It just becomes another component. And the U.S. will be sidetracked and will pat Israel on the wrist while continuing to support these sort of activities. And in fact, Netanyahu goes on to say, quote, "No international pressure will prevent us from acting with all power," unquote. And I'm sorry to draw these kind of comparisons, but that sounds extremely fascist to couch things in such terms. But that is how he also intends it. And I want to finish with the fact that the ultimate irony in here is it's all about the land. That's what it's all about. So any of these other agendas that are put forth in media and by politicians and these government leaders to sidetrack us away from it, it's all about the land. It's all about Palestinians giving up what little land they have left, and Israel consolidating the positions in the land they have now and confiscating as much more as they can get. And the ultimate irony in the end of all of this is that here we have Palestinian militants who are firing rockets at villages and towns where their families used to live. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.